Welcome to America's Top Rebbetzins. May this class be for Refuah Shalema for Amuna Bracha Bat Rachel, Ahuvia Oshri Itia Bat Sarah, Bina Eti Bat Sasha Elka, and Haya Esther Bat Barbara. Please click on the subscribe button to subscribe to us on the America's Top Rebbetzins YouTube page, or click follow to follow us on your podcasting app so that you're the first to know when an inspiring new episode is posted. I'm really excited to have on today's show Rebbetzin Gila Ross. Rebbetzin Gila is a certified parent educator who blends the latest research together with Jewish wisdom to help parents develop strong relationships and bring out the best in their kids. Thank you so much for being here. Please tell us more about yourself and what you do.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real treat to be on here. So, a little bit more about me. I'm a mum of 8 kids. I always feel like that's, of all the things, thank God, that I've done in my life, that's the thing that I'm most proud of. And I think the biggest impact really that we have on the world is how we educate the next generation. So that's first and foremost. I've been a Rebbetzin now for close to 17 years or something like that. I've lived in Germany and in Calgary and in Vancouver, both in Western Canada. Now I'm in Manchester, United Kingdom, and I host a podcast as well, which is called the Power Up Podcast. And the idea really is to give like short bites, snappy pieces of inspiration that people can relate to and impact their life. And I know a lot of people are busy, right? So that's the idea behind it. And I'm also really, really passionate about helping parents have a really good relationship with their kids so that they can help the kids navigate life and they can enjoy parenting again.
I love that. That is so beautiful. And we have some really great questions that will hopefully do exactly what you said to help parents build relationships with their kids and navigate life and through these tough challenges. Because the teen years, we're going to be talking today about the teen years. The teen years are not easy. So let's dig right in. So today we're going to be talking about a topic, as I said, that many moms struggle with: parenting teenagers. And this is understandably challenging because teenagers are not little kids anymore, but they're also not adults, and they don't have the life experience necessary to always make the best decisions. So it's funny because even with this lack of experience, many teens will still think and say that they know everything. It's so interesting. And a few weeks ago, I posted on Facebook to see if anybody had any specific questions that they would ask a parenting expert. And many, many women responded with excellent questions that I would love to talk to you about today. So let's start with the first one. How can we help our Yes, this is exciting. How can we help our teenagers effectively deal with their emotional outbursts and chaotic inner turmoil without ourselves getting emotionally frazzled?
Okay, so firstly, I have to say that I love, love, love that question. I've got a little confession to make, and that is that I personally, I have my oldest is 18, my youngest is 2, so I have quite a few teenagers. I've also spent over 10 years of my life working with teenagers in NCSY, and my favorite stage of parenting actually happens to be the teenage years.
Wow.
Um, and I'll tell you why. And the reason why I recognize why I love this question is because whoever asked the question is recognizing what the difficulty is, right? The teenagers have big emotions, right? And usually what trips us up is when we get emotionally involved with it, right? And this
Exactly. Yes.
the question that the person who's asking the question is recognizing that the challenge isn't necessarily the teenager's emotions. The challenge more often is my emotional reaction to it. So
Yes.
in terms of answering the question, I would say that I believe the questioner asked, how can you help them navigate? Do you mind to just read that last sentence again? Because I think there was a part of it that how can we help
Sure,
our
yes. How can we help our teenagers effectively deal with their emotional outbursts and chaotic turmoil without getting emotionally frazzled ourselves?
Right. So I think the answer to that is I don't think it's possible to not get emotionally frazzled ourselves, but I think it's really important to recognize that our emotional reaction to the things, right? Because look, the reality is that when you're talking about parenting, we're not talking about a computer program, we're not talking about a robot, we're talking about a human being, right? And as humans, we're all messy. We all have our past thing. We all have our triggers. We all have our emotional reactions, right? And the fact that we are going to have an emotional reaction to what our teenager is going through is not necessarily the problem, right? Especially if we use that as an opportunity to to teach our children how to deal with emotions, right? Because what we're trying really to do here is what this parent is recognizing is that part of parenting, a huge part of parenting, is becoming our children's emotional coach, right?
Yes.
Teaching them how to deal with emotions, right? And the best way to do it, the way kids learn best, is how we deal with our emotions, right? So you can't take your emotional reaction from away from it. That's not possible because you're human. But what you can do is become aware of your emotional reaction. And I think that's step number one is to recognize I I'm having an emotional reaction to what my child is saying right now, right? This is a big topic. And it's what are the emotions are, and sometimes we can say that to our children, right? And that's I think why I like parenting teens so much, is because we can have that authentic relationship with them where we can say, you know what, this question that you're asking me right now is stressing me out. Or, the fact that you're having this big emotional reaction to something like that is making me feel very emotional. I need some time out to figure out where I stand. Let's come back to it. And then you have to follow up with it by doing that work and trying to figure out what's triggering you, what's your emotional reaction, what are you really afraid of, or what are you really like, what is it rational, is it not rational, how to deal with it. And it's really important that we go back to our teen and follow up on that conversation, right? So if you're I'll give you let's say a practical example, right? Let's say you're having a conversation with your teen about which seminary or yeshiva to go to, and your teen comes up with like some outlandish statements, which teenagers often do. They talk big and dramatic, right? And you're like, oh my gosh, like, like that's like, let's say your teenager turns around to you and says, you know what, I'll go there, but I'll waste the next 2 years, right? And then you have to dissect it, right? And let's say that's like, oh my gosh, like, no, I'm not paying you for you, right? Like, your initial emotional reaction is like, I don't want my kids to waste the next 2 years, right? So step number one is recognize I'm having an emotional reaction here, right? And when I'm in that emotionally charged place, I'm not in the best place to coach my child. And it's not an emergency, right? We
Yes.
can put it on hold until I'm in a better place, maybe until my child is in a calmer place, right? And then go back and discuss it with them. Right. So once you recognize what your emotional reaction is, then you can sort of say, okay, what's going on? And is the fear that I have rational? If it is, let's deal with it in a rational way. If it's not rational, then let's, sometimes we just have to let things pass. But recognize what your emotional reaction is. Take the time to get to know what your emotions are trying to tell you, and come back and discuss it when you're both in a calmer place.
I really like that. I think that you made a really great point. That's not an emergency. Most things are not emergencies. Listen, sometimes there is an emergency that comes up, so I want to acknowledge that. But most things are not an emergency, that they don't need to be solved this very second. So I like it, when you say, first of all, be aware of your own emotion, because we model emotional behavior to our children. So if we can be aware of our emotional reactions and realize sometimes our emotional reactions can be totally out of proportion to what the situation actually is. And if we can take a step back and kind of take a step back for ourselves, take a deep breath, take some time out and just calm ourselves down. And also make sure that our kid is calm, because if our kid is having a temper tantrum, and even a teenager can have a temper tantrum, that, when they're calm, when we're calm, and we can come back and approach it with a fresh head, maybe we'll come up with a situation that a solution that we may not have figured out when we were both in a heated state. This way we're both calm, we come back, we figure out what to do, and I think it's amazing, because we're modeling proper behavior, proper emotional behavior for our kids, and also we're not making the problem worse when we're
Yeah,
at a heightened emotional state, which can also
yeah.
happen too. So
Yeah, and it's interesting. I once had a situation with one of my kids where they said something and I got I emotionally reacted when I shouldn't have, and I went back to them after I walked away from the situation. I calmed down and I was like, look, I'm sorry, I apologize for what I did. And I said to my child, I was like, what do you want me to do when you say X, Y, Z? And
wow.
she told me, I just want you to listen to me. I don't want you to rationalize. Like, a lot of times when our kids are having, and this is teens and kids, our kids are having those big emotions, like, we rush in to try and fix it and whatever. All they need is for us to be with them. And the important thing for us to realize, and for us to teach our children, is that emotions have a shelf life, right? Like, if you think about any emotion, we get like emotionally charged, but then even if we do nothing, it passes,
Yes.
right? So just if you can be with them in the moment, if you can't because you're not in an emotional place, then communicate with them and come back and talk about it afterwards.
Beautiful. I love that. I love that advice. Thank you so much. Um, okay, so we have another very interesting question here. Many teenagers have chutzpah. They roll their eyes or they answer back rudely when you tell them something. Other teens are non-compliant and refuse to do what you ask of them, even if it's a simple task. So this can be very, very frustrating. And somebody really actually asked this question on Facebook, and I think it's a very, very important one. So can you please give us some strategies for interacting with our teens when they show chutzpah or are non-compliant?
Okay, so if you don't mind, I'm going to actually split those questions up into two different questions because I do think that they're they're slightly different, right? There's the question number one is what do we do when our kids are chutzpahdik, right? Our teens are chutzpahdik, and question number two is what do we do when our kid is not compliant? So let's deal with the first question first. What do we do when our kid is chutzpahdik? And I would the first thing I would say is what is chutzpah, right? For everyone, every family has a different definition. Parents have a different definition of chutzpah, and different parents sometimes have a different definition of chutzpah, right? For some parents, for example, the rolling your eyes, a teenager rolling their eyes at a parent is considered chutzpah. For others, they're like rolling eyes, like whatever. That's what teenagers do. That's not they don't consider it chutzpah. Which what is that a bad thing? No, everyone has a different definition of what chutzpah is. So I think that there's a couple of things to bear in mind. Number one is chutzpah also often is in the eye of the one, like is the chutzpah, is the child trying to be chutzpahdik or not, right? Because a lot of times what we perceive as chutzpah is impulsive behavior, right? A kid is reacting, right? And then they're just not thinking things through. So that number one is sort of to take the emotional reaction out of it and to recognize that like this is not my child being terrible. This behavior, what they're doing, really age appropriate. The second thing is it's absolutely fine for you to have your standards, right?
Right.
So if you don't want your child to roll your eyes at you, then that's fine. You can just say in a very non-emotional, very clear communicative way that I don't like when you do that. Please don't do that to me. Or if you don't like the tone of voice or the words that your child is saying to you, you have your standards and you communicate them with them. And it's your boundary that you kind of put up, right? Like with teenagers, a lot of what we're doing when we're parenting them is we're putting the boundary in place, and it's my job to protect my boundary, right? So if let's say I've gone through the first step and sort of said, what am I going to define as chutzpah, right? So I'll use an extreme example. I'll use an example, right? Let's say you've decided I don't my standard of chutzpah is I don't let my child call me names, right? Stupid, idiot, whatever. I don't let them call me names. So that's your standards. You communicate it with them. And if your child says to you, oh, you're so stupid or whatever, you can just clearly communicate to them and say, I don't like it when you say that to me. Please don't use that word to me, or I'm not going to engage with you until you can say that more respectfully or whatever. But again, it's not you're not your job is to kind of say like this is my boundary, right? This is what I decide as respectful behavior, and this is what I'm going to do to uphold that, right? So my standard is that I expect to be spoken to respectfully, and if you speak to me disrespectfully, I'm not going to engage in that conversation until you start speaking to me respectfully. And what we're doing there also is modeling for our children the skill of, in life you're going to meet all different types of people, right?
True.
And you have to know what your boundaries, what your standards are, and your job is to put the boundaries in place so that other people don't cross those boundaries, right? Instead of going on to think like, how could you be so disrespectful or whatever? I don't like this. This is not okay for me. And if you want to have this conversation, then this is my boundary. There's got to be respect in place.
Beautiful. I love it. And I love the concept of boundaries because you're really, again, modeling for your child. This is a boundary. This is how I want to be treated. This is my standard. You're verbalizing it, you're articulating it, you're saying it, like you said, in a non-emotional way. And if the child is having difficulty maintaining that boundary, you're not engaging with them. And you're letting them know, I'm not engaging with you until you're ready to be respectful, or however you want to word it, without getting emotional about it. Just kind of, this is my boundary. Stop. That's it.
Yeah. And my job is to protect that boundary, right?
Right.
And in terms of the second question, so it's a very interesting question because it can kind of get blurred. But it's interesting because I find with teenagers, like it's not so much about compliance, right? Because teenagers are at that point already where, and again, it depends how old your teenager is, but they're getting closer to the point where they are going to be making their own decisions. So
Yes.
I personally, I could be wrong about this, but I feel like as parents of teenagers, we have to shift between that thing of I need to get my child to listen to me, is I need to teach my child values, the values that are important to me. So if your child is not complying to you with you, the question I would ask is why, right? Now, a question that comes up often with things, and it's actually something that I'm really, really passionate about at the moment, is technology, right? And if your child is you have a difference of opinion about how much screen time they should have, or about whether they should have their own device, or whether they should be on social media. And it depending on what your family's values are, everyone has a different question that they grapple with. But I think it's fair to say that almost every family has the question of that there's a disagreement between parent and child about technology, right? So the question is, yeah, when your kid is 4 or 5, you're talking about like, how do I get my child to listen to what I say, right? Because they don't have the emotional maturity to sit down and say, you know what, like if you spend too much time on watching, you're not going to get your homework done. Maybe that they'll understand, but it affects your attention span, etc., etc. But when our kids are teenagers, right, they're 13, 14, 15, that's the time where we need to start engaging them in conversation. We need to start explaining to them, this is why I believe what I believe, right? And even though you may not understand it, right? Like, but we need to have that. Yes, obviously, we need to, we're still the parents, right? We still need to put boundaries in place, etc. But we have to shift much more into that mindset of, am I teaching my child why this is important? Am I teaching my child the information, the values that they need to know, so that when they're 18 or whatever age it is, they will make healthy decisions, right? Will they know when they are 18 what the pros and the cons of technology are, what questions to ask about it? So I think to go back to that question, right? I use an example, but to go back to the question is, if your child is not complying, I would try and figure out, why is my child not complying? Is it because they're going through an emotional difficult time and that's their way of communicating to me that something's wrong? Is it because they just don't understand why this is important, right? Is it because they're upset with a system and they're communicating it? Like, or is it just hard for them, right? I do think it's important to engage in that kind of conversation, firstly with ourselves and also with our child, that conversation of what's going on here, that this is a point of disagreement between us. And sometimes we do have to kind of say, what, I'm still the parent, and like whatever, like a kid says, I hate going to school on time, and you kind of say, well, you know what, I get it, and I get why you don't see, and I get why this, and I get and that the other, but like, as a parent, I still understand that the habits that you build up in these years are very, very important. And therefore, I'm going to still say that it's really important for you to do it. But there's got to be that conversation, those conversations about what's going on, why are they doing what they're doing, right? What is their behavior communicating to us? And what are the values that I'm trying to communicate to my child through this? Um, um, and then hopefully you can come to some sort of understanding of each other, and work together to work it out.
I love that. And I love that your teen is old enough that you can engage them in conversation. They're not like a little kid that's illogical and irrational. Teens are at that point where they're not kids, and they're not adults either, but they are rational to a certain point. I know some teens are more rational than others, but they are at the point in their lives where you can have a conversation with them, and you can really talk to them and try to figure out why they're having trouble complying. And I love that you gave like different reasons why a teen might have trouble complying. And it's not just, oh, they're being a bad kid or they're being rude. There's a deeper reason why. And it's up to us as parents to engage them and try to figure out why. why something is bothering them. So that's
and then help them
them
through
work through that.
whatever it
Exactly.
is that the pieces that they're missing. And I would say you're 100% right that our kids are old enough, and it's also, it must, right? Like the teens that they are today, they're smart, they're
Yes.
intelligent, they're authentic, they see, right? They know, right? Any sort of
Yes.
things that we haven't yet worked on ourselves, they'll notice, they'll see it. And we that's why, like, it doesn't work to hide it. And it's important also for them to see that we ourselves are working on becoming more compliant. We ourselves are working on our relationship with Hashem, our relationship with others, like all these, our boundaries, all these things that because we're not finished products, and they know that we're not finished products. So there's no point in pretending that we are, but it's very important that we can, obviously within reason, and they still have to respect us, right? They want to respect us.
Yes.
Our kids really do want to respect us, so we have
Yes.
to choose what that we're sharing in a way that is helpful, right? and
Yes.
and and not in not too much. But they learn from who we are, right? If we're the type of person, when we're struggling with something, because I think if you go back to us, we'll struggle with complying with what God wants from us at some
True.
point,
True.
right?
Yep.
And we have to work through that, and we have to show, when they see that we're working through what we're struggling with, then we can engage them in that same sort of process as well.
For sure. For sure. Definitely. Thank you. That was actually a really, really good answer. So thank you for that.
My
Um,
pleasure.
here's an interesting question. So many teens tend to engage in risky behavior, like staying out late or experimenting with drugs and alcohol or going to places that they aren't supposed to be, and generally doing things that can possibly be harmful to them physically, emotionally, mentally, and even spiritually. So my question is, how can we prevent or discourage our teens from engaging in risky behavior?
Right. So again, another really, really, really good question. And it's important for us as parents to know that the prefrontal cortex, which is in charge of the part of the brain that sort of helps decision making process, is not fully developed. I don't think it's when a child is a teenager, and therefore, yes, they are more risk. They are more likely to do impulsive behavior, and they are more likely to do things that put them at risk. And I think the two kind of things that we have to put in place to help safeguard our kids, right, is number one, we have to have a really strong relationship with our kids, right? We have to have a relationship where we are comfortable. I think Rabbi Yaakov Horowitz put this in, and it's so beautiful. He says that he's got an agreement that he puts in put in with his kids, that there's a no questions asked, right? That if one of their kids ever find themselves in a situation where they need help, they can call him, and they can pull out this, like, no questions asked, and the parent will be there and help them out. So if, God forbid, your child finds themselves in a situation where a friend wants to drive, and they're under the influence of alcohol, and if they have that strong relationship with you, and they know that you can call them up, and they'll say, look, I don't want to talk about it, and you'll just say, I'll come pick you up and bring you home, then they're going to be safe, right? Whereas if they are worried that I'm going to call you up and you're going to ask me who is driving, who provided the alcohol, how much alcohol did you have, like all these hundreds of questions, then they're not going to be able to withstand that peer pressure. So we have to really be that safety net for our kids. And how we build up that safety net is by having that strong relationship with our kids, by also normalizing that teens do risky things, right? That is part of it. And there's pros to that, in that as a teenager that is the stage of life really for exploring and experimenting. Our job as parents is to make sure that they explore and they experiment in a safe way, right? Because it's about finding out who they are, finding out their boundaries, finding out how they can their values, etc. But our job as parents is to make sure that they do that in a safe way. And so that's number one, is the relationship. And number two, the second piece of this is the conversations, right? The ongoing conversations, right? If alcohol is risky, it's not enough just to tell your child don't drink. Share with them, again, obviously in a safe way, like, what happens when someone drinks, right? How that impacts their ability to make safe decisions, how that impacts, their ability to drive safely, right? All these sort of things. That the more conversations we have with our children, so that they understand that it's not just, oh, another adult putting another rule down, but actually there's sense behind it, right? Then hopefully they'll understand, but also once they trust that the reasons that we're giving them not to do things, not just because we don't want them to have fun and good time, but because actually we care about them, we love them, protect them, then even those things that they don't hopefully buy into, then they'll trust that we have their best interest into heart. We're not just putting rules into place, but actually there's we're doing it for their protection. And I think the best way to do that is really, number one is again that strong relationship with a safety net, and number two is to have those conversations so that a child can feel safe to actually come and say to you, what is wrong with being on TikTok, or what is wrong with partying, or what is wrong with taking drugs just once. I'm not going to be I'm not going to be a drug addict, etc. And then we can have those conversations with it. And again, I think that also goes back to our first question about our emotional reaction, right? When
Yes.
we're aware of our emotional reaction, we can say, what, maybe I need a few minutes. Let's talk about it at 7 o'clock tonight, or let's whatever, right? So hopefully those two things can do it. But it's again another really good question.
Yes. And yes, and what stuck out for me from what you said was that these teenage years are really the time where kids explore and they experiment and they engage in risky behaviors. And our job as a parent is to make sure when they're exploring and engaging that they do it in a safe way. And it's very interesting because it reminded me almost like when they were little kids and on the playground. Little kids, they just go. They don't know, they don't look, is a car coming, is another kid coming, they just go. And it's our job as parents to protect them, whether it's the playground or in the supermarket, or when we're walking down the street. Our job is to protect them in that particular phase of life. So in the teen phase of life, it's the experimentation, the exploration, the discovering of who I am type of phase in life. And it's also, yes, it's a different phase, but we have to explore them in now this teenage phase of life. It's a very interesting point that you made.
Yeah, and I would also add a vital element of this is prayer, right? We have to
Yes.
dive into there are so many things that are not in control, right? The teachers they have, the friends they have, the situations they find themselves in. Like, we need to pray and pray and then pray some more, that
That they're
God protect our
protected.
children.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Amen. Yes, for sure. So this next question, it's kind of alludes to what we were talking about before, but it's even deeper, because communications with teens is interesting. When they were little, they used to come home from school and you would hear every little detail about what went on during the day, including what their best friend had for lunch, what color paint they used in art class, like everything. But once they become teenagers, it's like talking to the FBI. They can't tell you anything because it's private information, top secret. Teenagers reveal nothing. And this can be especially concerning when you sense that there's something wrong, whether it's with school or with friends or anything else. And you ask them about it and say, okay, I'm fine. There's nothing to talk about. And they're really not okay. You know that they're not fine. You know that there is something there, but no matter how many times you ask them, no matter how nicely you word your questions, no matter how you approach it, they just won't talk. And this can be very, very frustrating to a parent. So, can you please tell us what is the best way to handle this type of situation where your kid, something is wrong, but your kid just will not talk about it?
All right. So again, that is a really, really good question. And I'm gonna divide it up into two questions, because the question number one I heard is just the general question of, in terms of communication with your children. And the second question is, what do you do when you know something's up, but they're not opening up with you?
Yeah.
So the question number one, in terms of the question, is 100% right, right? When your kids are young, it's in a way it's much easier, right? Because they come home from school, you're there, they talk to you, right? You want to spend time with them, usually that's fine. When our kids get older, it's not about it's not about them fitting into our schedule anymore. It's about us fitting into their schedule, right? So when they come home from school and we're available, it doesn't mean they're going to be in the mood of talking, right?
Right.
But it could be if they ask you for a lift to take to take them to, I don't know, shopping, 3 hours later, and you say yes, then they'll be open to talking. And they might chat your ear off and chat, 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 chat in the car for a half an hour while you're driving them. So I think as a parent of a teenager, we have to be very conscious of the fact that we need to find the openings when they're ready to talk to us, when they're ready to spend time with us. It's not so much about saying, you know what, looking at my week, this is my week. On Wednesday from 8 to 9, I'm going to spend time with my teenager. Like, it might work, but more often than not, what's going to happen is you're going to be around, and then all of a sudden on Thursday, like at 9:30, your kid's just going to suddenly come into the kitchen and start talking. Right. So we have to be open and available, and sort of grab those opportunities when they're available and ready to talk, and give them time and attention to that. So that's just more general in terms of how it changes from when our kids are little to when our kids are older. In terms of the second question, I think it's such a good question, that a lot of times we have a situation where we know something's up with our kids, right? We know those things, and they're like, it's fine, or they just don't want to talk to us, and you know so much can be going on here, right? Sometimes the teen themselves is not fully aware of what's going on. Sometimes they're worried that if they tell us, we're going to go and speak to the school, we're going to speak to someone else, and they just don't want their thing. Sometimes they want to protect the privacy of their friends. Like, there's so much that's going on. So I would say there's a few things. Number one is respect their privacy, right? Unless you think there is harm, right? There's danger of harm, right? And even if there is danger of harm, I would say, if your child comes and mentions to you that they have a friend that is, God forbid, suicidal or something like that, then, and they won't tell you who, then I would have a conversation with that child and say, look, this is a conversation where someone's at risk, right? So either you have to go and tell and report it to someone else, or give me that information, I'll do it, right? But like, I'm not gonna right. So, but unless most of the situations are not really right, like, if it's not right, let's not get into which are or which aren't, but if it's not a situation where someone is at risk, right, is really at risk, and they don't want to tell you, so don't. So, you know what, I respect your right not to tell me who it is, right? Again, it's about making it as safe and easy for our children to open up to us, and to tell us as much as they can tell us, so that we can help them. I think we always have to bear in mind that our goal in this is not getting my child to talk to me, but is getting my child the help that they need. Right now, if this is a situation where your child doesn't want to talk to you, will they talk to someone else? Right? Will they perhaps see a therapist? Will they perhaps see someone else who's doing it? Because again, sometimes it's not easy to talk to a parent, right? Our kids want us to see them a certain way, and it might not be easy. And as parents, we have to put aside our personal feelings there and say, my job is to get my child the help they need. And if that's going to be through them talking to someone else, I have to put my ego aside and say to my child, would you want to see someone? Is there a teacher in school that you trust? Is there a Rebbetzin, a mentor in the community that you think, is there would you see a therapist? If there's a resource in your community that helps teenagers by setting them up with mentors, use it, right? Again, it's about getting them the help they need, even at the cost of me stepping out. And I want to tell you something. If a parent is able to do that, it's hard, but it is going to be so strong for your relationship, because your child will know that my parent is willing to do what it takes to help me. It's not my parents just prying because they want information, but my parent really, really cares about me. And that's a long-term investment that you'll have in your relationship with your child.
I love that. I love that because, a lot of parents, they want to be the one to help. And of course, we want to be the one to help. It's our child, of course. But sometimes we're not always the best person to help. And admitting that, that it's hard. It's hard to admit that to yourself. But, if you admit that to yourself and you're able to have your child speak to somebody else, it could be a therapist, like you said, or a rabbi, or a member of the community, or just, a family member or friend, somebody like that, who can really, really get them the help that they need, or talk to them and have that conversation with them to help them through whatever it is that they're going through. Even if it's not you, if your child sees that you're willing to step back and let it not be you, and let it be the appropriate person, whomever he needs, that's amazing. That's really special, that because it says a lot about the parent, and it says about not only does it say a lot about the parent, but it says a lot about the way that the parent feels about the child. And it's not about the parent. It's not about ego. It's about why can't you come and talk to me? It's about what can I do to help you? Whatever you need in whatever way, even if it has nothing to do with me, how can I help you? And that's really, really important.
Yeah, yeah. And the child will hear your love in that stepping back.
I love that. Yes, yes. I that totally resonates with me. Thank you. Thank you. So along those lines also, somebody asked, how can you tell the difference between an introverted teen, somebody who just prefers being alone and doing things by themselves, and a teen who is actually emotionally depressed? Because it can sometimes look the same.
Right. So again, that I think it's a very good question, and it shows that the parents obviously like really wants to get the best. So I would say a few things. Number one is the child generally happy, right? Because if a child is introverted and they're generally happy within themselves, then they have a different type of composure, right? Is it, are they not happy, right? Also, another sort of question to ask is were they always like this, right? Did they always, or was, if you had a child that kind of like enjoyed going out to social things, and then they're all of a sudden like, no, I don't want to, I'm just happy on my own. Like it's about sensing like, is this, are they genuinely happy, or are they just right now going through something more? And the other thing that I would say is that if you're concerned, reach out for help, right? Discuss it with with a professional, someone who knows more, whether it's someone who knows your child or just someone who, a mental health professional who can sort of help you work through it. I think the good thing about the world that we're raising our children in is that there's a lot more awareness, right, of the different struggles that our children have, and there's a lot more resources that we can tap into. And as parents, we it really is a strength when a parent reaches out to professional and ask for help. It shows how much they care, because it's so much easier to just bury your head in the sand and say, ah, my kid just likes being introverted, or you know what, but to turn around and say, I don't know, I'm going to reach out to someone else for help and to find out, it's a strength, and we have to view that as a strength and a sign of our love. So if you have a question you're not sure, reach out to a professional and get advice.
Thank you. Thank you. That's the best way, because sometimes we as parents we can't see things clearly. We're so emotionally involved we can't see it. So that's
Yeah.
yes, asking an outside person just to see if they can evaluate the situation and give us an objective opinion is so smart. So somebody asked a question. It's along the lines of it. But I want to pose it anyway, just in case maybe you have something to add to it. So many teens have mental diagnoses, like actual mental diagnosis, like ADD and actual clinical anxiety, clinical depression. So the question was, how can we tell when it's adolescence driving the behavior versus when the teen is behaving a certain way specifically due to a diagnosis? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I hear the question. It's an interesting question. And I would answer in with a question back. Why does it make a difference what's driving the behavior?
right.
Let's just say take something like ADHD, right? It's a diagnosis.
Yes.
Um, but at the end of the day, it's what the diagnosis does is it gives the child, hopefully, and the people in their life more of an understanding of how they work, right?
Yes.
At the end of the day, they still have to. I believe the research shows that the most effective way of managing ADHD symptoms is through a combination of medication and therapy, right? Like
Yes.
there is the whatever it is that they have, they still have to learn to manage that, whether that is through medication, whether that is through, you know, therapy or coaching or whatever it is, right? They still have to learn to manage it. And I'm not sure how helpful it is to sort of, ask like, is it becoming from this? Is it coming from that? I guess maybe a different question to ask is kind of, is this something that is very age appropriate and is something that the kid is going to grow out of, that I don't need to worry about, right? So that I think is a question you can kind of ask without having to know, is it ADHD or is it teenage things? Because some of it is overlapping, and the question is it something that they have to be coached through? Is that something that they have to learn the life skills of how to deal with, or is it something that is age appropriate and it's just going to pass on its own?
I love that. I love that answer. And it's true. It's true. Exactly. Because the behavior is the behavior. Yes, if the child has a mental diagnosis, we can understand maybe it's coming from this, maybe it's coming from that. But at the end of the day, like you said, it is the behavior. And it's the behavior that needs to be managed through all the techniques that we were talking about today, through building a relationship, through having conversations, through letting other people, into your life. If the child feels comfortable talking with another person, all the tips and techniques could even work in this situation as well. So I think that's really,
Yeah.
it's a
Yeah.
great answer.
Thank
Um,
you.
yes, I just have two more, hopefully, that we can get in that came from Facebook. I just really want to answer all the questions because moms really do struggle, and we have so many questions. So thank you. This is also along the lines of what we talked about earlier, but why do some teens tell you everything and others keep things to themselves?
Right. So that's a great question, and I think it's personality. You'll have I think anyone that has more than one child will often see this, is that you'll have some kids, and I think this starts even really young. You have some kids and they come home at the end of the school day, and you ask them how the day was, and you'll get nothing, and you'll get some other kids and they will tell you everything, right?
Yes,
From who they sat next to, what, and it's just some kids do, and some kids talk a lot more about what they do, and I think that follows through teenage years as well. And again, if it that on its own, the fact that a child isn't very talkative isn't a problem, right? If the relationship is strong, if you know more or less where your kid is up to in life, and your kid feels comfortable coming to talk to you when they're things, so if they're not telling you every single thing about what it is, some of that is personality, and we just have to embrace the personality that we get.
I love that. And that probably also answers the last question. Why do some teens not want to be hugged or touched? Sometimes you go to hug a teen and they're like, no. And other teens are just craving affection. That's probably also a personality thing, too.
It is a personality thing as well, and I would recommend also a very good book here, which is it's called the Five Love Languages,
Yes.
which is it was originally written as a marriage book, right? But the principles apply to parenting as well. It could be that there is actually an edition written for parenting, but the basic premise is that different people, you know, receive love in different ways, right? For some people, it's physical touch. For some people, it's time. For some people, it's gifts, right? For some people, it's words of affirmation. And when we kind of learn what our child's love language is, then we can give them the love that in the way that they can hear it. So, for example, if you have a teenager or a child who doesn't like to be touched, and you keep on giving them love, in
Physical
by
affection.
hugging and kissing them,
Yep.
then they're not going to hear the message "I love you so much." But if and let's say that their love language is spending time together, right? Then if you sit down next to them, even if you're not, even if you're just whatever, reading books together, whatever, or doing anything, that's how they're going to hear it. So that's a really good resource to kind of look at as a parent. Five love languages, and then kind of just think about, like, what's the best way to communicate with my child in a way that they're gonna hear my love.
You're right. And I think there's actually a book, Love Languages for Teens, like that's
Right.
specifically written for teens. Awesome advice. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rebbetzin Gila, for joining us on America's Top Rebbetzins. It was really, truly a pleasure to have you with us. We learned so much today. And may all the learning that we did today be for Refuah Shalema for Bina Eti, Bat Sasha Elka, Haya Sarah, Bat Barbara, Amuna Bracha, Bat Rachel, and Ahuvia Oshri Itya, Bat Sarah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me. And if anyone would like to reach out a little bit more, and or has any individual questions or whatever, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. Yeah, you can find me on Instagram. It's Gila Ross. You can email me, gilaross@gmail.com.
Perfect. I'm writing this down and I'm going to include it in the podcast description below so people can reach you. Thank you. Thank you
Thank
so
you so much.
much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure.